Hey, Reachers. Welcome to our daily devotional. Thank you guys for tuning in today. I hope you've been keeping up with our daily reading plan through the Bible. If you haven't seen it yet, today we're going through 2nd Chronicles chapters 13 through 17. And we get an interesting look at everything through this. We have like the entire life of King Asa and some Abijah versus Jeroboam at the beginning. And then we also have King Jehoshaphat at the end. But before I start, if you don't know me, I am Bryce. I am the drummer here and also now the intern. I've been going here pretty much since the beginning for like 7 or so years. So if you haven't seen me, you've probably heard me on the drums. If you haven't heard me, you may want to go to the doctor. But with that out of the way, I say let's go ahead and go through it. So hopefully you've already read through this, but if you are like me and most of the time you wake up at noon, you probably have not read through it today. So I'm going to give you a quick synopsis of what happens. So in 2nd Chronicles chapter 13, we have King Abijah of Judah going up against Jeroboam, who is the king of Israel. And they are like at a standoff, ready to go to battle with each other. And Abijah gets up in front of Jeroboam and preaches a sermon to him about why his side is the correct side and God is with him and that they're going to win this war. And while this is happening, Jeroboam looks at him, probably laughs a little bit under his breath, and then sends half of his army to surround him on the backside. And by the time Abijah finishes, he realizes he's completely surrounded and that they're probably going to lose. So in a last-ditch effort, he cries out to God, and then God delivers them, and they have great victory, and it's awesome. And King Jeroboam dies, and then after a while, or not after a while, after just a short 3-year reign, King Abijah then passes away too. And so that's where chapter 14 picks up. King Asa takes over. And as soon as he takes over, God delivers him 10 years of complete and total rest, where there's nothing happening, there's no wars. And Asa takes the time to seek after the Lord, remove all of the idols from his land, and fortify all of Judah against invasion, which is exactly what God had asked him to do. And it's just a great picture of what we should do as Christians during a restful time. But then later in chapter 14, the Ethiopians actually attack Judah after 10 years of rest. And the Ethiopians bring with them 1 million soldiers, which is a lot of people, a lot more than Judah has. And Asa cries out to the Lord, and the Lord actually delivers them and brings them great victory, and it's awesome. And then chapter 15 picks up as Asa receives a prophecy from the Lord through the prophet Oded, who tells him, hey, you need to continue to seek after the Lord, and if you do, good things are going to happen. But if you don't, bad things are going to happen. And Asa is like, yeah, I'm going to seek after the Lord. I want good things to happen. And so he continues to remove all the idols from the land. He removes all obscene images, and then he also throws a giant festival for the Lord. And then that's about all for 15. And then in chapter 16, we kind of see the downfall of Asa. And this is during the reign of King Baasha of Israel. During that time, Baasha began to militarize the city of Ramah and cut off all trade to Judah, which is a sign of invasion. And when Asa sees this, he assumes, oh, they're going to invade, and they're doing it with the help of the country of Syria. And Asa says, hey, I can probably handle this on my own. This is normal political turmoil of the time. I'm going to overlook God, and instead I'm going to take some money from the house of the Lord, and then I'm going to bribe the king of Syria and get him on our side. That way Israel can't invade. And that's exactly what they do. He takes money from the house of the Lord. He goes to the king of Syria, and he says, hey, you're a pretty sketchy dude. Would you like to switch sides for money? And the king of Syria says, yes, I'm a very sketchy dude. I'm going to switch sides for money. And that's exactly what happens. And then they're delivered, and they don't go to war with Israel. But then the prophet Hanani comes and tells them, hey, you overlooked God, and because of that, now you're going to be at war with Syria for the entire rest of your reign. What God wanted to do was give you victory over Israel and Syria, but instead you only have victory over Israel, and now, until you die, you're going to be at war with Syria. And that's what happens. After his 35 years of peace until that moment, the next 6 years are straight war. He eventually gets gout, and then he dies. And then, this is where chapter 17 comes in, Jehoshaphat takes over And he learns from what his father did, and he sees that removing all of the idols was a good thing. And so he's like, I'm going to start out on the right foot too. I'm going to remove all of the idols. I'm going to teach everyone here the law. I'm going to send out teachers to equip everyone with the word of the Lord, and we're going to have a great nation. And that's what happens. And then his enemies actually see their nation and how they're all educated with the word of the Lord, and they fear him so much that they send him tributes. And it's actually really awesome. We'll see more of the life of Jehoshaphat next week when John takes over. But this is it's a very good start for Jehoshaphat. But the main point that we get to see in the Bible or in 2 Chronicles is this entire life of Asa in chapters 14 through 16. And I think it's important to see Asa in all three different situations of his life. He has 2 periods of rest where basically the same things happen. He has 1 period where he's greatly outnumbered in a terrible situation, and he uses the time to cry out to the Lord. And I think the important thing to remember is when we do feel overwhelmed, it's important to seek after the Lord, because when we know that we can't accomplish what we need to accomplish on our own, the Lord can give us deliverance. And that's essentially what he does when he's being invaded by the Ethiopians. But the thing that allowed Asa to be delivered was the fact that in his time of rest, he was still seeking after the Lord, and he was building up his fortifications and making sure that his heart and his people were in right standing with the Lord. And I think in this time right now, like everyone's kind of rotating between having absolutely nothing to do and feeling incredibly overwhelmed. And that's a lot like Asa when he went from complete rest to then being invaded by 1 million people. But during both situations, he was still seeking after the Lord. And I think that's what we need to do. When we have times of rest, just make sure that we are building up our fortifications or building up good spiritual habits, being in the Word, being in prayer, making sure that the people in our family are in right standing too. That way, when times of incredible stress like we sometimes have do come, we are prepared to cry out to the Lord and know exactly where to go. But then we see another application in the fall of Asa. That's when he was being almost attacked by Israel, that was very normal. Israel and Judah were pretty much always in contention with each other. And I think a lot of times in our normal lives, it's easy, like Asa, to overlook the Lord and think that we can do it on our own. And I think that's an important lesson to keep in mind as we're finally kind of sliding back into normal life-ish, somewhat things are opening. We can sometimes sit down at restaurants and whatnot, and we're beginning to plan a time when hopefully y'all can come back to church. It's important to remember that even when things feel normal, that's not an excuse to take things into your own hand. It's just as important to look after the Lord and see what he has for your life. So don't make the mistakes of Asa and overlook the Lord when it feels like you're in control. But when you're not in control, it's also important to seek after the Lord. And so I think that's just generally the good application from the life of Asa. And then I think another thing we can get, honestly, from Jehoshaphat is to look at the lives of our fathers and those above us and the elders and copy what they did right and carry on with it. As I think that was very important too. But we'll get more into that next week. And that's about all I have for you today. Thank you for joining. I hope to see you all again next week, and I can't wait to see you all again in this church.